Integrating faith at work for me is not about trying to act more Christian. It just
Mm.
that's we have a persona of what that looks like, but that's not really what it is. It really is about knowing the one who defines me and letting him renew my mind as I yield and abide in him. Um, that may not sound like fireworks, but it's true. It really is. As I spend time with him, there's an outpouring then of how my faith operates within my work, and again in every area of life.
Welcome, everyone, to FaithWorks Lancaster, our podcast, Conversations on Calling. You're not used to, if you've been listening to more than one episode of this podcast, you're not used to hearing my voice at the beginning or seeing me talk right from the get-go, because this has been Josh's role. So I've been upgraded, and depending on how I perform in the next few seconds here, you'll be able to find out.
You're doing great. You said the title better than I do. The title's already better than I said.
That's good. There we go.
You did a pause. That was fun. Look at that. That was better than me.
Exactly.
We're going to do it from all episodes from now on. That's been decided.
Oh, I'm not done yet. Don't grade me already. Anyway, welcome to this episode of our podcast. I want to encourage you to after you've taken a listen, if you're still interested, make sure that you subscribe. We are on a few more places than we've been able to share to this point. So we've already mentioned, you can find us on YouTube. You may be watching us on YouTube right now, but you can find us on Facebook and Instagram now. You're able to find us for our podcast, for listening to our podcast anywhere you get your podcast, right? Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. You can find us at FaithWorks Lanc. And of course, you can find us, if you're old school, on our website at faithworkslanc.org. I want to stress that one because I'm responsible for that one. So faithworkslanc.org. Check us out.
Eric does a lot of work on that. If you could just at least open it once, that would be super cool.
Mm-hmm.
Go do the website. It's fun.
Exactly. I'm going to text Josh and say, "Hey, we had another website visitor." So, anyway, all right, okay. Let's get serious now. So I'm really excited about the guest that we have to talk to with in today's episode. So Chris McNamara here with us serves as a director of people and culture at Lancaster Bible College in Lancaster, PA. LBC has featured a couple of times here already from some of the conversations that Josh and I had earlier. So this is one of our friends, right, from LBC. Now, Chris's path to her current role wound through a lot of places, through real estate, through raising children, through ministry, through nonprofit leadership, and all of that is relevant to our topic of conversation today. She's passionate about helping people see their work, their relationships, and daily rhythms as places where God is present and calling them to live out their faith with purpose. Chris is really well positioned to talk about today's topic, which is creating culture that sticks. Now, I want to say something personally about a little bit about Chris here. So I'm a big fan of Chris McNamara here. She and I got to know each other through our work together at Lancaster Bible College. And everything I've said before about her passion, I know it to be true from experience. Also, I've had a lot of fun with Chris geeking out about productivity, distinctly Christian productivity, project management, work as worship, those sorts of things. And one of the venues for this was a mid-manager development group that Chris has led for several years at Lancaster Bible College, and I had the privilege of being part of that when I was part of that team. So I'm really grateful to Chris, and I'm looking forward to talking with her, who's here with us. So Chris, looking forward to talking to you in a moment here. But Josh, I'm going to hand it back over to you because you also have a kind of a connection with Chris as well.
Well, yeah, I still work with Chris because some of us are still. Go unnamed. Let's see the other person here. No, yeah. So Chris, you and I really appreciated you over. You and I have probably not gotten to work as closely as long as you and Eric did before Eric left. But you had the wonderful joy of joining the AI task force with me. Right.
And it is a joy.
Yes, it is a joy. And I'm trying to think, like, it's been a bit now since the task force has started. It always feels like the task force just started, but
Over a year.
Yeah, it's been over a year now at this point that we've been working on together. So I can attest too to what Chris will be talking about today. She definitely lives out. I see it every day on the task force, in our interactions, and the way we're just thinking through how we use AI in the workforce, and how we do it at LBC. But I have also gotten the joy recently, Chris, of being able to interact with you in the mid-managers meetings as well, because one of the mid-managers is gone, and so I'm now in that role. So I've appreciated that in between some of the leaders groups you've done, just your focus on how faith integrates into the work we're doing, and I think that comes through in the way you talk about work. So I'm excited to kind of break that down from your perspective, because Eric and I have both been people who have gotten to see the repercussions of what you do in your work, because you're in our people and culture department and HR, and so we kind of see that in another angle. But it's been really nice to get to know you in that part. But before we do all of that, enough of Eric and I talking at this point. We're swinging over to you, Chris. But you weren't always a people and culture person, HR person. So, as is tradition on the long-standing FaithWorks Lancaster podcast, it's been going for 6 episodes. What was your first job, Chris? What was the first job you ever worked? Or at least
Well, before I answer that, let me just say thank you both for the kind words and encouragement. And I respect the two of you, and I appreciate the two of you. I appreciate your approach to work, your care for how you do things, and you seek to do things with excellence, and I appreciate that very much. So thank you for the intro. And as far as my first job, it was a family-owned ice cream parlor in Exton. Yes.
Okay.
So yeah. So I served ice cream and hot dogs.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow. Okay.
What was the most popular?
My wife's from like the
it is not still around. No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. I was just curious.
So
that's where my wife is from, that area. So
this was as a teen. I was about 13. I think.
Okay.
So that's, yeah. So.
What was the most popular flavor of ice cream?
Well, banana splits were the most popular ask.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Most popular ice cream, I honestly don't remember, but banana splits. Oh, chocolate milkshakes.
Chocolate milkshakes.
Yeah.
Okay. Chocolate milkshakes and
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And banana splits. Yeah.
And banana splits. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes
and I will
sense.
say it also helped me learn conflict management working for a family business.
Oh, yes. That would be.
That is not one of our questions, but perhaps it should have been.
That's for another podcast.
Part 2 with Chris McNamara.
The deep dive of the dark, seedy world of ice cream. That's right. Episode 7.
Yes.
That's very cool. That's
goodness.
nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
That's great. Okay. Oh, well, that's fascinating, and now I'm hungry, and those of you perhaps on your commute listening to this home from work, maybe you've decided you're going to take a detour now to your closest ice cream parlor. Anyway, we're not able to do that, so let's redeem the time this way. So, Chris, I know this from conversations we've had and from some of the stuff that you've shared, and from knowing your role at LBC and some of the roles you had before that. But so the role that you have, as we've talked about, is Director of People and Culture, and work in HR, kind of broadly defined, right? You spend your week in a role that isn't formal ministry, right? But you clearly don't treat it as a separate compartment from your faith. And in some of our conversations, some of the other things you've shared, you kind of gone through a journey to kind of realize the relationship, between these things, right? So can you just walk us through a little bit of that, of your own kind of like life and thought journey that got you from the point where this kind of line between your job and your faith, the dividing line, really kind of didn't make sense, right? And you realize you saw the relationship, between the two, and just related to that, what did it take to start seeing your daily work as a call itself as a calling?
Right. Yeah. So I was not a Christian when I first, and so we'll move away from the ice cream parlor and go into real estate. And so when I started working as an adult, I was not a
Natural
Christian.
movement. Most real estate agents start as ice cream people.
Exactly.
Anything else from here? It's
There's a direct correlation to that.
Sell ice cream, sell houses. Hey, it's
Exactly
necessities of life,
now,
right? You need a house, you need ice cream.
That's right. There you go. There you go. But going into work, I had really a God as I understand him mind frame. That was my faith. And work was something that I did to achieve, to prove myself. And so they were two totally separate things. I had come out of an addictive background. And so I had come to a place growing up. I didn't believe in God for a period of time. And then I believed in God. And then I came to a place of, okay, there is a God and he's as I make him. And that was my faith as a young adult when I first started working. And so work was just something that I did to achieve. And quite honestly, work just kind of became another addiction. So the big shift really was when I put my faith in Christ. And when I started not just knowing about God, but knowing God through that relationship with Christ. And I really very quickly began to have an internal perspective. And one of the verses that jumped out at me was, he must become greater and I must become less. And that wasn't just a verse for me, that was a mindset that I was really convicted and burdened with. I want to see God become bigger and I want to see me become less. And in that process of that prayer and really seeking God and getting to know God, he really began to, there were some God happenings that started to dismantle who Chris was. This is all still process. And so he started really working on that pride, that self-reliance, that self-righteousness, all of that self stuff. And he used some pretty big events in order to do that. And one of them was taking me out of the workforce and having me be at home. Another one was having children. Another one was a tumultuous marriage, my first marriage. And then my first husband was killed in an auto accident. And so at that point, I was pregnant with our third child. And the responsible part of me would have just gone out, gotten a job, and taken care of everything. But God put me in a place where I had no choice but to completely rely on him. And so my worth, I started seeing my worth as being how he defines me. And the fact that I am his creation, I'm his child. And that's really where that shift between my faith and work started to meld together. They're not two separate things. I'm sorry, they're no longer two separate things, but they work together. My work actually demonstrates, how I work demonstrates my faith. How I was a mom demonstrated my faith. And so it became, wherever he had me, that was the place that I was going to exercise my faith.
That's first of all, Chris, thank you for sharing all of that. That's not I didn't know all of that before this, even this moment, so I'm live reacting to some of it because that doesn't necessarily come up in AI task force meetings very often.
It doesn't. No.
Yeah. But it explains some of just what I've witnessed, like your strength and what just I think the maturity you bring to some things. So I appreciate that. And I think what's interesting is in each person's story, the more Eric and I are doing this, right, we get to hear more stories from different people about how they get to where they're at. And it's and everybody's story is a little bit different, right? But there's some, I think, commonalities of often God using scenarios in our lives to show us that, like, especially in the workspace dynamic, where it's like, I think a lot of us who are I think we've got several type A personalities in this call right now for this dynamic, and work can often become a place where we feel like we're in control, and we have a certain level of agency in it, right? Not all the time, but how God can use those scenarios in our lives to kind of like bring us to a place of realizing, just like, yeah, we don't you don't have all the control, and you're going to need to
Exactly.
rely on me. And I think that's an interesting start to your story of where
Yeah.
that kind of takes you to a point
Yeah.
of just looking at work different.
Yeah. Yeah. Completely. Sorry, Josh. I started to speak over you there, but yeah, Chris, thanks for sharing that. I was going to say that couple thoughts. One is that point that you've both made here, that work is certainly a space where, because we're exerting effort and we develop some proficiency and perhaps are congratulated and promoted, and we have
Mhm.
successes, right, that can kind of reinforce this sense of independency, of I'm doing this, right? And our American culture doesn't help us, resist that that urge, right? And just kind of work culture generally. So dependency, recognizing work, as a calling that is something that we are to steward, which means that we're not always working, right? That's
Mhm.
part of it, right? We are to rest, as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
But that when we do work, we see it as what it is, right? So we're stewarding creation through our work. We're loving our neighbor, and working as an expression of gratitude to God is so important for us to maintain, and work has to be done to hold that perspective, I think. The other part, and this is kind of going in a real different direction, but something that's come up from a few of our episodes here in conversations with other, is the work of parenthood. Right now, you're a first female, you're a first mom on the podcast so far, and so I'd love to hear again, just maybe just a little sidebar here too, about any kind of reflection on that work as well, right? Because that's one of the things I've been thinking more and more about, that we need to
Mm.
recognize that the work of parenthood, the work of mothering, at any stage of life, and whether there's a an occupation for which you're compensated on the side that's happening or not,
Mhm.
that's an aspect of our calling, of our work too. Is that something that you've given consideration to, particularly as you think about your own timeline of being kind of coming out of and then entering back into paid work?
Yes. So, and yeah, so going a couple of different places, and when I left work to be at home, it was definitely, it was a calling from God. I had become a Christian. I had become convicted that work was not my entire life. Um, I honestly was not necessarily keen on motherhood at the time. Um, and I won't say much more about that, but that just, um, I was raised that I was supposed to become something, and that was my main focus at the time, from an executive standpoint. And so that was my main focus. And so I was actually convicted to be a stay at home mom, and not only that, to homeschool. And I won't start
Mm.
going down that road at all, but it was also one of those things that I was not for. It was not, and so for God to bring me home and say, okay, this is what you're going to do with your daughter at that time, in and of itself was a real God thing. And so, to your point, what you're raising is really that Romans 12, that all of life is worship. And so, whether
Mm.
it's at work or it's at home, what does it look like to worship in those spaces? And so, when He called me to be home, I really had to learn what that looked like, what that meant to be a mom, what that looked like to love my kids and be satisfied in that, to be content in that.
Mm.
Because again, work defined me, motherhood didn't. And so,
Mm.
um, yeah, and it is. I mean, and that work both. You talked about the control, where we really don't have, we think we have control. It's also, those small children, you think you have control of them. We really don't. They are God's children. And so we're responsible to steward them. Um, but maintaining that balance of being responsible and stewarding, but also continually letting them go.
Mm.
Um, and so, yeah, that same perspective runs across work and raising children.
Yeah. Wow.
Mm.
Thanks. Yeah. That's helpful, and I appreciate
Yeah,
that perspective
that's
too.
well
It's
said.
coming from the position that you hold, the leadership that you give, and your personal story there. That's really rich. Thank you.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I can definitely relate to all it takes is a small child to make you realize you have no control over several things. So I spent most of like my early life as not having children. It is amazing how much like I think just becoming a parent changes your perspective on so many different things, but work is definitely a big dynamic as well. I think it changes the place, at least for me, has changed like the placement of where work is in my life in some ways, and changed the way I look at it. And then also looking at that as like this is very much a way that we live out being image bearers of God, who is the Father himself over all of us, and seeing how
Absolutely.
he does that is very interesting, and just seeing how you pick out some of that perspective of how that the way you love them, the way you care for them, what you do for them, how that is all you reflecting that in that moment. Coming back then to professional life, right? Because part of the reason we're having this podcast, and you talk a little bit about this because this is your journey, this is where you get to, right? This is what kind of pushed you over the line of realizing there wasn't quite as hard of a line between work and faith, right? But as I talk to a lot of people, and I'm sure you experience this too, Chris, it's we have a lot of Christians out there that say faith should shape their work, but then when it comes to actually doing it and the how, it's usually, in my opinion, devolves down to just being like, be a nice person and say Jesus at the water cooler. And we know there's so much more to that.
Exactly.
And how you do it. So I'm curious for you personally, what does that actually look like? Operationalizing faith and work in your scenario, right? In the way you run a meeting, you give feedback, you make a hard call, you handle a frustrating colleague on a task force that rhymes with Josh. Whatever that is, how has that changed?
All right. So there's two parts of this for me, and so one of it is the personal side. So what drives me, and it's not integrating faith at work for me is not about trying to act more Christian. It just that's we have a persona of what that looks like, but that's not really what it is. It really is about knowing the one who defines me and letting him renew my mind as I yield and abide in him. That may not sound like fireworks, but it's true. It really is. As I spend time with him, there's an outpouring then of how my faith operates within my work, and again in every area of life. And so again, I haven't arrived, but as I spend time with him, it really is about renewing my thinking, my choices, my and my responses. And Philippians 2:13 reminds me that he's the one that's working in me, shaping my intentions and my actions. And Colossians 3 reminds me that I'm working as unto the Lord. And so what does that look like on a moment by moment basis, and on a daily basis? And there are times where, and starts getting into the operationalizing, there are times where more than one biblical principle can apply. So truth and love, right? Grace and accountability. And we tend to focus or lean on one and not the other. Empathy and boundaries. Operationalizing faith means discerning which principles best honor God and benefit everyone involved. Or better yet, how to wisely apply both principles. So when I give feedback, I hold empathy and boundaries together, because caring for a person and being clear about expectations both matter. When I make a hard call, I see, I look to act on what will most honor God and be beneficial to others, not necessarily the easy way out. It's because both need to apply. And obedience matters more than the outcome does. And when someone frustrates me in an AI meeting,
Here we go. I'm listening very closely right now, Chris.
Yeah, I'm listening I feel like this is very similar to, I was in a leaders training meeting with Chris, and she would give examples, and I was like listening for how similar it sounded to what I had done in a meeting recently. I'm just joking.
You do not frustrate me. So let's be very clear about that.
Everybody's been so nice to me on this podcast. I'm just waiting for somebody that I know to be like a jerk.
Today.
And I just hope it's to you, not to me, because I don't like confrontation. I don't handle it as well as Chris does. But, anyway,
but to jump,
sorry,
to
we
jump back to what
interrupted
you were
you.
saying.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. To jump back to what you're saying, Chris, I think I want to highlight something, right? Like even the example you gave, right, of how when you're giving feedback, you're balancing this this love and truth element, and I appreciate your highlighting of that we can often over acknowledge one or the other in a lot of these scenarios, right? So like in the example you're giving, right, is when you're giving feedback, you're talking about how you're loving the person, but you're also giving them clear expectations, and you're setting those expectations well. And this is a part of, like, for me, that for a long time I've not seen talked about in operationalizing faith and work, because it's like, as Eric and I have talked about this, like excellence, being clear, those things, those matter just as much, because they are even in a way loving the people around you, right?
Exactly.
They're being clear about them is loving that person. Doing good work is loving that person and around you. And so that's an interesting highlight of where you've maybe you're balancing those two different pieces. I'm curious, Chris, this is not a question we threw on here, so if you don't end up liking the way you answer it, this will get edited out.
Okay.
But I know you and Eric have talked about this a lot, and Eric and I have talked about this a lot, and it comes through in the way you do stuff. Like, I've worked with you, and you try to do excellent work as well. You're always a person who's, thank you wonderfully, is hitting deadlines. And I think Chris, I think if I could, I don't think I'm reading too much into this, because I've heard you talk about this, and I know you and Eric have talked about this too. Like, you see that as a way of living out your faith in what you're doing. You talk a little bit about why that is, right? It's just obviously the, like, being truthful with people and things, but why even for yourself, the excellence and the getting stuff done the way you do. How has your faith, like, changed that in your perspective? Does it make sense?
Well, and it really, this might sound too simplistic, but I think about it. Well, James talks about how do we know someone has faith? It's demonstrated by the work. Now, that might be a different context, but it's true across the board. If I trust that God's in control, if I'm seeking to honor God in everything that I do, if I'm filled with the Spirit and I'm yielding to the Lord, then how I act, how I do things, how I interact is all a matter of faith. And it becomes less about me and more about honoring Him, and what does it look like to honor others above myself. Now, I don't walk perfectly in that. I'm still very human. I still have moments, but even if I'm offended, or even if someone hits my pride button, I still have the ability, because of my faith, to say, okay, Lord, help me get your perspective on this. And I'm reminded of, He made Himself nothing. Well, then who am I, and how long am I going to sit and mope on this? So for me, it really, it comes out of that relationship with Him.
And it seems,
I don't know if that answered what you were.
No, it does.
Okay.
It's flowing out of your relationship with Him, the way you look at, I mean, the traits, the characteristics, the things that Christ was, and that we're called to be the same. It was not just a nice person. It was a lot of things that Christ did that I think we can often gloss by, that you're pointing out is it should change the way, even down to the way, like the pride element of that we bring to work. Like if Christ lowered Himself in those moments, it doesn't mean you let people tread all over you, walk all over you. Christ didn't do that either until the moments that it was that He was going to win at the end anyway, and it was clearly a part of the mission, right? And so I think that changes the way we see things, even in the meetings that we're in, or the way we're I think back to recently, Chris, us doing this emerging leaders thing together, and we're having some conversations with everybody that was there about how this even changes the way, like, I look at how I respond to emails, right? Like, if I'm responding to an email to someone in that moment, yes, there are some moments where I do need to be strong words and push back against something in those moments. But what I've started to even realize for myself is how it changes my perspective, is to think about, okay, what in this moment, what am I trying to achieve? am I trying to just prove that I'm great in this moment? And if that's the case, then I need to back off. This is not a moment for me to do this. Am I speaking up because I'm protecting my team? Am I speaking up because there's an excellence thing here that we need to deal with? Then that might change the way we do it. And we can do it in a nice way, or as I joke about, I can eventually put it into an AI that I say make friendly and it changes my language.
Exactly.
But even just that email is a moment to like create something and build something different in what we do. Yeah,
absolutely.
That totally makes sense.
And Chris, you mentioned at the beginning, you offered it almost apologetically that this might be too simplistic, and it's not, right? Because it's simple and basic and straightforward, and yet it's another theme that is emerging as such through this podcast is the false dichotomy between the sacred and the secular, right? I think a lot of Christians, with good intent, and we're just not having considered this, think, all right, well, my faith applies, or this is sacred when somebody approaches me and they ask me, why do you just live differently, or why don't things bother you, or as much as they bother us, or why you're different, right? And that's kind of the classic story. And certainly as Christians in non-Christian or pluralistic workplaces, or even Christian workplaces, we want that to be seen in us. But because there is no sacred secular divide, to use an example from you just offered, Josh, the way you frame that email communication, when you send that email communication, all of that is, the sacred calling extends to that, to every little detail of our work. And this is a point of on one hand, condemnation of us, because just think about the ways in which, in small ways, we don't love our neighbor, we don't love God, in how we work on a day in, day out basis, whether we're lazy and we're ultimately stealing from our employer, or we are in a position of employing others and we steal from them by overworking them or something like that, But thank God there is grace, right? There is forgiveness. I've kind of been speaking to the law here, and the other side of the law is gospel, right? And so we can seek forgiveness. We are forgiven, and we can seek to do better. But nonetheless, it is all sacred, right? In how we work, regardless of the workplace that we're in. And I think what you were saying, Chris, really spoke powerfully to that. Somewhat related. We've talked about kind of like personal behavior, kind of to this point, but like you sit in a seat that most none of our guests so far, neither Josh and myself don't, and probably most of our listeners aren't in HR, human resources, right? People and culture in your current role is a little bit more expansive than just kind of the classic HR definition. But if we think about not your roles right now specifically, but generally working within a ministry or Christian nonprofit context, what is it like to try to cultivate a workplace that genuinely cares about faith and work at the policy level? So this is more of the organizational consideration than the personal one. So that it's faith and work are integrated, in the culture of the institution, not just in kind of some inspirational or aspirational kind of way. So where have you seen, or what's it like to cultivate that, to lead that kind of change, so that policy and then the practice of policy actually moves the culture, and then maybe where have you seen that not happen too?
Right. Yes. Yeah. So HR is often seen as a rule enforcer, but it's actually one of the most powerful levers for shaping how people experience dignity, clarity, and purpose at work. At its best, HR creates the conditions where people can thrive and where organizational values become lived reality. And getting to store that kind of influence is actually a privilege. It doesn't come without challenges, however. One of the unique challenges in Christian environments is that sometimes we over spiritualize things, right? So that's where accountability is required. Sometimes we'll use Matthew 18 for a performance issue, but Matthew 18 is really about personal sin, not job performance. And so that becomes a challenge in trying to implement faith. And as we talked about earlier, more than one biblical principle can apply. Grace and accountability, encouragement and correction. And those are real tensions in HR. So there's a discernment in choosing what best reflects God's character and leads to the healthiest outcome. And people get stuck on those. And so for HR, being able to set clear direction and give clarity and equity and policies that help people work within boundaries that don't go outside of. We don't have to quote scripture to be biblical. We need to be compliant, and that's not contrary to being biblical. It actually is biblical. How we carry those out again goes back to caring about people, being equitable, being fair. But one of the other issues that we've come across is confusing being nice with being biblical within the workforce. And HR is not about being nice. We don't avoid conflict, we deal with conflict. And so, what does it look like to deal with conflict in humility and in truth and in love? Again, that's not biblical, that's not harshness, it's actually biblical clarity. At the policy level, we have the opportunity to shape culture by policies that we implement. When we put assessments in place, they bring clarity and fairness. Employee assessments, conflict resolution pathways. They help build direction. And again, how do we handle those situations with truth and love? Salary frameworks create equity and dignity and stewardship and how we compensate people. And so these policies shape how people treat each other, how leaders lead, and how trust is built. And I think so one of the places where we hit walls is anytime policy requires people to change their habits, not just their words, is where we tend to hit walls. People want change. They want things to be better, but they tend to be resistant to taking the actions that they need to take on their part. People and culture, HR doesn't do it all. We set the policies, we set the guide rails, but it's actually people who affect culture. And so those are the places where sometimes we can hit walls. But some of the other places we hit walls are where people see perceived unfairness or inconsistencies in policies. And so we try to not have that happen. But if policies feel like they're applied selectively, trust erodes. When scripture is misapplied, especially by leaders, that also can hinder trust, and people are very uncomfortable with that. And so you start to hit walls, and people being able to work with you, they can tend to work against you, because while they're for the values that we're trying to promote, they're not sure that the values are being enacted with integrity. And so those are places where HR, people, and culture tend to get involved.
Yeah. Wow, that's really insightful. There are a couple quotables in there, at least a couple of them. One thought that crossed my mind as you were saying that was that if we think of work as or my work, individual work, right, as loving my neighbor, through what I'm doing, I'm kind of hearing there's a sense in which seeing the work of HR within an organization as we're talking about faith and work integration. So within a Christian organization workplace where that faith is overt and the expectations that we can have around that are shared, but we also have these challenges where we perhaps sometimes expect things of an organization that are more properly placed within our local church or faith community, rather than in that particular workplace. And so helping navigate those challenges is important, critical work. And so there's a sense in which going from the personal of how I operate as an individual worker, right, and seeking to love God and love my neighbor through what I do. In HR within an organization, you're really helping the organization answer the question, how are we going to love our neighbors, right? So collectively, how do we work as an organization? And a challenge I think there is, it's so much easier, and you kind of said this in a way, to do this as an individual, right? But instead, where it's not just like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
this is the way I would like to do this, and I think I'm doing it for the right reasons, but how do I adjust my behavior and my habits such that I am contributing to my organization's goal and means of accomplishing that goal as a collective group, right? Where we're not able to just come in and say, hey, I'm a Christian. This is how I think my faith relates to work. I'm going to go and do it. The organization has its own priorities, and HR is really that space where you're going to work that out. So there's a sense in which HR has, I think, additional, maybe you can speak to this because you've worked in Christian and non-Christian contexts, but like where HR within Christian contexts is, I would venture to say, probably more challenging in some ways than in non-Christian. I mean, there are your own challenges in a kind of pluralistic or non-Christian context, but I would imagine that some of the baggage and some of the assumption that Christians bring into a Christian workplace is probably of a unique scale. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that is very fair to say. And I will actually, I don't know if this is a confession. So my last employer was a church, and I was there for a number of years, and I knew I was being called out, and so I had been having conversations for a couple of years over what this was going to look like. But there were also circumstances that took place where I also was really praying, Lord, I do not want to go into another Christian environment. And I did. I went and looked for jobs in secular positions, because I just wanted to be a light in the world. Because yes, it can be draining to operate under what everyone's perception of what it means to be godly and to act godly and to be a Christian. And yes, we have so many different perspectives on that. That yeah, within a Christian organization, it is more difficult. And like you said, other places have their own issues, but there isn't that additional expectation. They understand compliance, okay, or HR, we follow these rules, and this is, and you don't necessarily want to be that way, but there's not as much of a pushback as there is within a Christian organization, because a Christian organization, as that, like Matthew 18 is one of those easy ones that gets thrown around all over. Well, we should just well, you can't Matthew 18 everything. Life doesn't work that way. So, yes.
Yeah, and we're all reading the same Bible. We have the standard within a Christian organization, right? And we're all reading it, and we're all coming to our own conclusions about it in terms of what it means, even for how our organizations operate.
Yes.
Right. And so we come in as these little, presumed authorities, and to point to the standard, and failing to sometimes recognize that I'm actually pointing to my interpretation of this particular standard or my application of this that may not be accurate. One, it may also not be shared by the organization. Right. So, wow. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, and like Matthew 18 is a perfect example of like a scenario that can often just get. This is what Eric and I have said this a lot from the podcast. Most people probably listening are interested in faith in their work and their dynamic. I don't know why you would have accidentally ended up in this podcast if you weren't interested in those things.
We're happy you're here if you aren't, but
we're happy you're here. I'm not saying don't leave. I'm just saying I really want to know how you got here. Like you were looking on a podcast for different things. And anyway, but we've tried to articulate, because I see this in the interview process too a lot when people we're trying to come to LBC, right? It's this perspective that like, well, if I work at a Christian organization, it's going to be better dynamic. And it's like it can often be a more complicated animal, because people can often like weaponize things like Matthew 18 in a work environment in a unique way that we have not found in secular environments. And like Eric said, there's a lot of their own problems there too. It's the world is broken because of sin. And so no matter where you go, it turns out we need Christ no matter where we are. And so
take heart. We're all screwed up.
Yeah, take heart. We're all screwed up. Surprise. And so that's an interesting component of what you're bringing up on the HR side too, where you're trying to make policies and things that where often I haven't thought about that in quite the way you're expressing it, which is often, I think, work policies can get merged with how the church was supposed to do things. And like Matthew 18 is a good example of like, well, that's not what Matthew 18 is about. Jesus wasn't like, hey, here's how you run your organization and organizational conflict. He was about, hey, church,
Right.
this is how you deal with sin in your
Right.
family community of the church.
Right.
And so I think having those contexts are important. Before I jump to our last question, there was something that kind of came across, and it's coming back again in what we're talking about here, Chris. I'm curious your perspective from a faith and work dynamic, a Christian dynamic. How have you viewed change management being different as a believer, and your role in that, right? Because it sounds like what you're describing a lot is like a lot of it is like change management, what you're working like. Yeah, you can change a policy, but you also have to work with people to change practice. And it turns out we're not great at that. So I'm just curious how you've approached change management in your work, and what, like, how your faith has informed the way that you approach it.
Good question. I think I might have shared a little bit in Emerging Leaders. It might have been our last session about an experience I had in the past. And the reason I raised that is because it was very much change management and how I maybe didn't handle it so well. So one of the things I've become very aware of is really being sensitive to where people are at when it comes to change management, like not just plowing through. I may have a great idea, I might have everything in place, but I really do need to get relational buy-in. And so in order to do that, it means having more conversations. It means being patient and moving slowly. It means saying, all right, Lord, help me understand this person's perspective. It doesn't mean we're not going to do it because they don't agree, but it helps me better understand where they're at. So I can, when we do go ahead and move forward, I can do it with more of a sensitivity rather than plowing through like a bull in a china shop, which tends to be my nature. And so it's really helped me have a different perspective on the people part of implementing change management versus just here's what we need to do and let's just do it.
That's really good. I do remember that story, which is also why I felt a little safe asking this question, because I felt like you had a take on it. But I remember that story because it also stuck with me too, because it reminded me of, like, you, Chris, you're not the only person, right? Like I remember very early on, I've shared on this podcast, I was in ministry, and this moment is distinctly held in my mind forever in a snow globe. Like, I don't know why a snow globe. It'll be a snow globe, I guess. But it's a moment of being like fresh out of college, taking a ministry job for the first time, and expounding all this change day 2 that I was going to bring to the ministry. And like your point, Chris, the people don't take that well. I thought they'd be fine with it because they were all like, we need to change things. And to Chris's point, people really like to talk about change until they're told about it. And
we love the idea of change.
Right? Yeah, we love the idea of things being different until they are.
It's getting there, right? Yes.
It's getting there. That's the problem. And which is basically half of the Old Testament. But the
True.
is I remember that moment, and I think that's important. What you're mentioning here is it's I think a lot of faith work integration is about thinking about it just changes the way you view what you do and what your goals are behind doing it, right? So like change management, your goal is not to get your way or just make the change. It's your goal should be to see people in a better situation than they are now, or see the organization in a better place than they are now. And you have to bring people along to do that. And that takes practice and skills that I think pretty much everybody on this call at one point has messed up at some level, and so I think that's a really good point. Now, jumping back into a little bit here, the conversation, most people probably listening, like Eric joked, aren't from an HR background, unless we have like a really big HR group listening. If we do, that's super cool. Make sure to email us and let us know. That would be crazy. There's like an HR team.
Leo, do let us know in comments, write to us, whatever, because we need to recalibrate our personas.
And they're like, we're entirely an HR department. Our 50 plays early on is the entire HR department of some place. Please let us know, because that's terrifying. We're influencing a place that we shouldn't at that level. But anyway, most people are probably not in HR. They don't get to write the company handbook. They're not in that scenario, right? but they do shape people and teams every day. And so I'm curious from your perspective,
Exactly.
what's, from everything you've been cultivating, you've been learning for Faith and Work, and the kind of creating a culture, from your seat, what's the one shift an ordinary worker, mid-manager could make tomorrow that would start to make the biggest impact in their corner of an organization from your perspective?
Well, here we go back to simplicity.
Good.
It just it's moving from self-focus, reacting, to God-focused responding. And so what do I mean by that? It means letting God renew your mind, so your choices and your responses begin to change in the everyday moments. It really is that simple. And we don't need titles to influence culture. We influence culture by how we show up in the positions and the roles that He has us in. And so how we speak, how we listen, how we handle frustration, how we give feedback, how we address issues directly instead of talking around them, how you choose clarity instead of avoidance, how you treat people with both compassion and honesty, all of that. It's about how we show up, and it all flows from being more focused and responding out of a God focused than out of a self focused. Yeah, and one of the things, so in summary, culture changes because people know who they are in Christ, and they show up differently. Um, and if you think about people that you've come across that you think, there's something different about them. Usually it's because you dig a little deeper. It's somebody, they knew who they were in Christ, and their focus is really on all of life is designed, created by God, formed by God. He's got a purpose and a plan. And so, how do I fit into that? And how do I honor Him and serve others? And as you said, love my neighbors in whatever space, place He has me in, whatever place I am in life. And so, again, when we respond differently, people experience something different. And that's what starts to bend our corner. I think that was a part of your original question, to bend our corner of the organization toward a healthier, more biblical way of working.
That's
Josh,
well
if I could
said, Chris.
Yeah, if I could jump in here just to kind of reflect on that for a moment. So there's this book by Alan Arnold called The Eden Option. And he presents kind of like two stories, right? Two ways of kind of thinking and living in the world, really kind of two worldviews. And he calls it story 1 and story 2. So story 2 is where we are at the center of the story of what's going on, right? And I think that kind of goes back to kind of, Chris, your reflection on sort of your early life, right? And I think it's true for all of us, whether we were raised in a Christian context or not. We all have had a time, and maybe even probably in some level we're still struggling with that right now, getting ourselves out of the center. So story 2 is where the self is at the center, and story 1 is where God is at the center. And I think this applies. The context of that book is more spiritual formation. It's not work as worship, but I think it applies equally because it's part of that. I mean, work is a domain where we are spiritually formed or deformed, right? Through how we live in that space, think about it, and carry out our work. And so I think what you were just reflecting on there too is kind of making that shift from this story 2 life to the story 1 life, where if God is at the center, then who's there also? If we're not at the center, God is at the center. But in order, how do we love God? We love God in several ways, including how we love our neighbor. And so, anyway, you highlighted as simple, and it is, and thank goodness that it is, because it's certainly, as we were saying, even policy, right? The doing of it is difficult enough, right? But what we should be doing is pretty straightforward. Right. So people go and tomorrow or today, depending on when you're listening to this, move the dial, by moving yourself out of the center and moving that person that you're serving, whether it's a colleague or the client that you have into the center of your work, serving them as you fulfill your calling, right?
Yeah.
Well said, Eric. That's a move the dial. Put God in the center too. I would add that piece, not just the person.
Yeah.
Yes,
But that's what you're talking about, right? Is the way you're viewing your story. I think that's definitely a theme. And like Chris, you said, you keep saying a couple times, not to make it too simple, but it should be simple to a certain degree. I mean, the hope out of this is not that the faith work integration is complicated. I think we make it more complicated than it really is. I think we can sometimes focus on the wrong things, but I think a lot of that comes down to our picture of who God is and what he cares about. And I put it this way: a lot of times when your picture of God is just the guy on a cloud up top, you don't see how your work fits into it. But when your picture of a God is an infinite God who created and created us, knowing what all of this was going to be like, and sent his son in the process to save us, and to bring the gospel, to bring us that hope, to bring us that grace. When you view that God who did all of that work, it changes the way you see yourself as well in the picture of what God is doing. I think that's a lot of what you're getting at.
Absolutely.
It's not, doesn't have to be that complicated. It can be simple. So takeaway out of all of this is it's simple, folks. I was expecting Chris maybe to go the best way you can change your environment is listen to your HR department.
I should have.
Yeah, you should. This is your moment. Be like, listen to the HR department. No, I think
so you should do that too. Just throw that out there. Everybody,
do that.
Listen to your HR department.
Unless they're not loving God and others, then maybe figure out a healthy way to love them as God did. So I think that's really, Chris, all the stuff you talk about down to the core. It's how you're loving God and loving others is what I think a lot of what you're getting at, and just the way you live that out in not just the moments it's not just being nice. I think if we're talking Lancaster podcast, that's probably the place Lancaster often gets it. We miss it, is because Lancaster, for those of you who don't know, is known very well for its solid, nice, passive aggression. So I think it's not just being nice, it's actually loving people through the actions. I think highlighting that, like what you're talking about, Chris, is that yes, while James is maybe talking about some different dynamics of things, at the same time that still applies here. It's actions and the way we do what we do in our work. It's loving people. And so no matter who you are listening to this podcast, whether you're like Chris and you're in the HR department, because we have a great HR audience, or you're in a different scenario, you can do that in whatever you're doing. I think the thing we keep coming back to on the podcast is you could do that in the way you're leading a meeting. You can do that in the way you respond to an email. You can do that in the excellence you bring to the work you do, both building things, working even in that Excel sheet that you're afraid to open tomorrow. You can reflect God in all of those ways. And so, Chris, I appreciate you joining us, sharing that. I appreciate, just again, I'll just say the work that you do. There's, for those of us who do work with you, I know there's a ton behind the scenes that we don't always get to see every day that you're doing. And so I appreciate your passion and effort that you do. It is seen in the way that you work. And so I really appreciate that, Chris. Seriously. Thank you for joining us with this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And for those who don't work with you anymore, I'm going to echo the same thing. Thank you, Chris, for this. And for all of those listening, I know Josh has already said this, but this is true. Chris, what she shared is what she lives. And so there's a great wisdom here that comes from experience and from reflection on what God has called us to. So thanks so much, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Everybody, this is another episode of FaithWorks Lancaster podcast. I'm going to pause like Eric did, our podcast Conversations on Calling. I still didn't nail it as well as you did. See, you're better at intros. I hope this was another week that helped you kind of see how your ordinary labor is extraordinary participation in the redemptive work that God is doing, even down to that meeting that you have at work. Thank you again for joining us. This was FaithWorks Lancaster.